Hello, amigos. How are you guys? Hope everybody's doing well. Welcome to my weekly live Q&A, episode number 34. The way this works for those who might be new to this program, it's pretty simple. You ask questions and I answer them. There's two ways of asking questions. One via Twitter, which is the preliminary questions, and two via the YouTube live chat, which I will take care of in the later part of this video. So pretty simple. I got the Twitter questions queued up right now. And so don't worry. Again, like always, if you didn't get to ask questions on Twitter, you can get to ask questions via the YouTube live chat in the later part of this video. So all good in the hood, all right? A lot to talk about. Obviously, we're coming off a big event, UFC Vegas 11. I think that was easily, in my opinion, the biggest and the best fight night card we've seen in the pandemic. To be honest, we've seen not the greatest cards in the pandemic due to the fact that there's a pandemic, there's COVID-19, right, affecting athletes and pulling them out of bouts. And then on top of that, travel restrictions. But this card actually held up pretty well and had, a lot of talent and a lot of big names for a fight night. So easily the biggest fight night we've seen since the pandemic era. And then we're also, a few days away from a pretty big pay-per-view, UFC 253 with Israel Adesanya defending his middleweight title against Paulo Costa. And then on top of that, there's been tons of news in the sport, like always. So a lot to talk about. Obviously, I think the Twitter questions, there's a lot of submissions today. Tackled a lot of the main topics, but I know you guys always surprise me and always have some good stuff on the YouTube live chat. Real quick, before we get started with the questions, sorry about last week. Last week was kind of crazy for me. I was super busy. As you guys know, I relocated to South Florida for a little bit, staying away from New York for a few months, especially in this winter. If, I think most likely, and that's what the experts say, that the pandemic is going to bounce back, obviously, with everyone going back to school and things opening up and just obviously, the warm weather going away as well as just the flu season. So I didn't want to go through what I went through in March in New York. So I'm like, I'm going to bounce, be in New York, be in South Florida. So anyways, so I've been quite busy down here. And then on top of that, last week was my birthday week. I turned 28. So by the way, thank you for everybody that wished me a happy birthday. And yeah, it was just busy. And then Tuesday came around and I didn't even have time to do it. And then I forgot to let everybody know that I was going to skip that week. Look, I was 2 days away from my birthday and I didn't even remember that it was going to be my birthday. That's how busy I've been. But yeah, good birthday. COVID free, healthy, still have a job. So life is good. All right. So plenty to talk about. So without further ado, let's get right into it. All right. I think it's kind of become a custom here in this program that 8 Paths of Wokeness kicks this thing off. It's, he's the biggest troll on this program, easily the biggest troll on this program. He's also a Dustin Poirier hater for some reason. But anyways, he has good stuff. So he asks, okay, last one. Actually, he asked some other stuff first, which we'll get to the later part of this video, but it made sense to answer this one first. So that might not make sense, the wording of this. But anyways, he says, okay, last one. Colby, who does he fight next? If it's not a title fight, he needs to fight a big money fight. Agree? Jorge or Nick Diaz? So yeah, I do agree. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of Colby. I think there's a lot of things that are wrong with his trash talk. But again, a lot of things are, even though I don't agree with them, I think it's hard to deny that it's effective. I mean, clearly he's been gaining a lot of traction with his fan base. And also, he's been getting a lot of hate by his haters, I guess, or his critics. And, unfortunately in this sport, the good old saying of there's no such thing as bad PR. In this sport, that saying goes pretty far. Obviously, there is a line that you cross, and then there's no return from that, and there's actually such thing as bad PR. But in combat sports, for whatever reason, I guess the sport being individualistic, also just the nature of the sport being a fight, right? These things kind of work that way. So, anyways, good performance. Like I said on Twitter, I also got lit up by all the Trump supporters about this. It wasn't his best performance. He admitted it on the presser. I said that on Twitter, and I got lit up by it. I'm not saying it was a bad performance, but to say that it's among his best, I think, you'd be lying to yourself. I mean, clearly he's had much better performances in the past. Even in the defeat against Kamaru Usman, I would argue that he actually had a better performance that night than he did against Woodley, despite losing that fight, right? There was just higher output. His game was varied. He was more dangerous, right? He was causing a lot more damage. This one was a little bit slower. But look, all in all, I mean, I think it's a big win, given the fact that, he's coming off a title fight loss, which, being on a big stage, being against someone that he hates. Not only that, but he got his jaw broken. Like, coming back from that, it's hard, man. A lot of fighters break down mentally from that kind of pressure. You see a lot of fighters get to the title and then, become a shell of themselves, or have certain injuries like a broken jaw and then lose a lot of confidence. And we didn't really see that with Colby. I mean, again, although it wasn't his best performance, he still fought well. So it was a good victory for him. I think the reason why the fight was so dominant was more because of, I guess, the current state of Tyron Woodley and how he fought that night, and really how he's been fighting really his most recent bouts. But whatever. Either way, decent win by Colby. Obviously, one of the bigger names in the division. He positions himself for a big fight. I do agree with you, A Passive Wokeness. I guess a big money fight is coming his way. I don't necessarily think a big money fight. I think when I think of money fight, I would say like Nate Diaz, Conor McGregor. Like, a money fight is a fight that is big. It could be relevant. It could be not, right? But it doesn't have to be. A big money fight doesn't have to be relevant. It doesn't have to be a fight that would position someone to fight for a belt or anything like that. It's just a big money fight, right? I think Colby needs a relevant fight. And, most relevant fights tend to be money fights. So there is kind of an overlap there. But anyways, he does deserve a big fight. I think Jorge Masvidal makes sense. I really don't think Nick Diaz makes sense. I think I would categorize Nick Diaz as a money fight. That's someone you would give to Jorge Masvidal. That's someone you would give to maybe Conor McGregor. Even Tyron Woodley. Like, those are the type of matchups that you would put Nick Diaz in. Hell, run the Carlos Condit back one again. Robbie Lawler, etc. But fight Colby, again, he doesn't need a big money fight. I think he needs a relevant fight, so I would scratch Nick Diaz out of that equation. I think the fight that makes the most sense is Jorge Masvidal. I think it's a fight that, on paper, honestly, like, I would probably slightly favor Colby, but it's a close one. I think it would be much closer than Masvidal versus Usman, to be honest. So that fight makes sense on a sporting standpoint. And storyline-wise, I mean, both guys hate each other. They just split gyms, right? Like, he left ATT, now at MMA Masters, so that kind of clears the path for an actual fight. It wouldn't be as problematic with two guys that hate each other and that are in the gym, And, I know a lot, like, early on, a lot of people were saying, like, yo, that beef is fake. They're still friends, this and that. I've told this story a million times. I went to American Top Team once. I think it was, like, last year in September, maybe. Yeah. And they almost got into it, and I don't even think, there wasn't really a media presence there. It wasn't a media day. I was just there on my own to shoot some interviews. I don't even think they realized I was there, and they were barking at each other, and I saw that. So it's 100% real. So I'd love to see that grudge match. I think it'd be fun. I think it's competitive, and I think it makes sense for the division. I mean, it'd be basically a title eliminator. And so, yeah, I would love to see that matchup, and I think it makes a lot of sense. Now, we did hear from Dana White not so long ago that there was plans of Jorge Masvidal versus Nate Diaz, right? Now, nothing's official yet. That's why I'm vouching for, I think Colby should fight Masvidal. Obviously, if it were official, I wouldn't be talking about this potential fight. But, you guys have always, for the people that have been tuning in for quite some time, I've always been a proponent, and I've been pushing for that trilogy fight between Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz. I think it makes sense for both guys, and, it's not an immediate rematch because, to be honest, I don't really like immediate rematches. It wouldn't be an immediate rematch for Jorge, but certainly for Nate Diaz fighting Jorge. So it would distance those two for a bit, so that'd be kind of nice. And look, if Nate Diaz were to win, I mean, I think that changes the equation, and it would make a fight with Jorge Masvidal a lot more interesting. If he were to lose, it depends on how he loses. I think you would still kind of have that Jorge Masvidal fight there. So I think that's the way the UFC should go about it. But we'll see what happens there. Obviously, Masvidal is in the works against Diaz, so we'll see what happens there. And then Gilbert Burns is supposed to fight Kamaru Usman, but within this pandemic, anything can happen. Literally, anything can happen. So I wouldn't be surprised if we actually end up seeing Usman versus Colby. I mean, you never know. I mean, COVID's still around, especially down here in South Florida, where Gilbert Burns trains. So, it's definitely has a big presence here. I think it's like up there among the epicenters of this virus. But anyways, good question. And I think that's what makes most sense for Colby next. I think Jorge Masvidal, that's the way to go. I always forget this, but real quick, give the thumbs up. Give the thumbs up, subscribe, tell your friends about this, and the super chat is open. If you feel like donating some money and contributing to this channel and its growth, feel free to drop some money in there. If not, just your subscription, any thumbs up will do. Cool. All right, next question is by Jesus Magdaleno, and he asks, as of right now, what do you think Michael Chandler's chances are against Khabib/Gaethje? If he were to fill in for either of the two, right? If he were to fill in for either of the two, if he doesn't fill in, who do you think should fight first? Who do you think he should fight first? So yeah, one of the news that we missed, I guess, last week, for me being absent on the live Q&A, it was Michael Chandler signing with the UFC. We knew that he became a free agent after his Benson Henderson bout. And, honestly, I didn't think he'd leave Bellator. I thought he was just trying to get more money, which is obviously a good strategy given the fact that he's got a big name. But he did. He did. At 34 years old, he's diving in the UFC waters of the UFC lightweight division, which is one of the most stacked, probably the best division around, really. So we'll see how he performs. But, I mean, I have high hopes for him. I mean, he's not a guy that's been slowing down. He's looked well. I mean, he picked up a first-round knockout over Benson Henderson. He's an incredible talent, an incredible athlete. And he got started in MMA kind of late, so it's not like, he's been around like Cowboy Cerrone for like 50 fights, and he's got a lot of wear on him. I mean, he's certainly not a newbie, right? He's certainly been in some wars. He's certainly taken some damage. But in the grand scheme of things, he's definitely still fairly young, I would say, in MMA. Maybe not fairly young, but definitely not old. So anyways, he's a replacement opponent for the title fight we're going to be seeing at UFC 254 between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Justin Gaethje. So against Khabib, that's an interesting one. It's like, it's kind of easier to like predict fights that from like UFC level guys, right? Because you see the guys fight other UFC contenders and you kind of get a pretty good gauge of how good they are and where they're at in their careers, right? With Chandler, like, don't get me wrong, it's not like he's been fighting all scrubs and you go, shit, like, we really don't know what he's capable of. And luckily, we've seen him against some UFC vets, right, like Benson Henderson. But at the same time, it's like we haven't seen enough of that where we have a clear picture of how he'll do in the UFC. And I think that's part of the reason why, he was signed and part of the reason why everyone's so excited, right? Because we really don't know what his potential is. And I guess we're going to find out pretty soon. So I don't know. I mean, it just seems like for example, Ally Quinta on short notice gave a pretty tough bout, I would say, to Khabib Nurmagomedov, certainly on the takedown department, right? Khabib had a tough time taking him down, but it came to a point where Ally Quinta was so worried about the takedown that Khabib's boxing sort of shined and he was able to sort of freed his hands up and with the takedown threat, his striking became a lot more dangerous. I think it would be my guess would be like a similar situation with Chandler. Chandler is obviously a very good wrestler. I think he could give a lot of issues to Khabib as far as takedown defense, right? And then on the striking, I would pitch him maybe not a better boxer than Al, but certainly has a lot more power, right? So that makes him more dangerous. But either way, I mean, I'd pick Khabib to win that fight. It's hard to pick against Khabib, even against Justin Gaethje, who seems to be tailor-made for Khabib's style. So So yeah, I would favor Khabib in that one. And then against Gaethje, I think that's a lot more interesting. I think that's a lot closer. Obviously, given the fact that they're both strikers, the fight would develop basically on the feet. And given Michael Chandler's power and the fact that Gaethje has been stopped before, you can't rule out Chandler winning by knockout, right? It is certainly a likely scenario. But it is also certain a likely scenario that Gaethje would go in there and knock out Chandler. I think that would actually be a fantastic fight. And I'd love to see that at some point, regardless of what happens between Khabib and Gaethje. But yeah, I think I would pick Khabib and Gaethje in both situations. Part of it is not really because I think that both fighters. I think Khabib's certainly significantly better than Chandler. That's my guess. We don't know for sure. With Gaethje, I think things are a lot more even, but because there's just more information on Gaethje and Chandler's a little bit more of an unknown, I would side with Gaethje. But I would say that Chandler versus Gaethje is kind of like it's got to be close to a 50-50. I mean, I would slightly favor Gaethje, but I think it could be very, very competitive bout. So yeah, that's how I see those fights. And if he doesn't end up fighting either of those guys, if he doesn't end up being a replacement opponent or actually using his replacement services, right? I would like to see him against the big name. Certainly, almost anybody in the UFC lightweight division, there are a lot of fun fights for him. Basically, anybody in the top 15 would be a good fight. But I mean, this is a big deal, right? You're signing a former champion from another promotion, not only a former champion, but someone who was the face of Bellator. I mean, if you say like who are the top, I don't know, five or not even five, like three most successful Bellator fighters. I mean, I'm not talking about like that have fought in Bellator, but actual Bellator products. It has to be Eddie Alvarez, Michael Chandler, and Patricky, right? Not Patricky, Patricio, right? I always get those mixed up, right? The champ. Certainly those three, right? So like you're signing like a face of Bellator, so that's certainly a big deal. So I don't think you would want to put him against the Dan Hooker. No disrespect to Dan Hooker, he's legit, obviously ranked in the top 5, certainly a worthy contender to anybody. But he just doesn't have the name of other fighters in that division. So I wouldn't put him against either a Charles Oliveira or really anybody outside of the top 10 for sure. I mean, I would think maybe a fight with Conor McGregor would be fun. I don't know how likely that is. Probably not very likely, but that would kind of make sense, and it would set up an exciting bout. I think stylistically, Conor would want that fight too. A Dustin Poirier fight, that would be amazing as well. I know there were rumors about that, but Dustin really wants to fight Tony Ferguson, so it doesn't seem like that's possible, at least for now, for the near future. Another fight that I think is very interesting, and I think this is not a guy that's in the rankings right now, but Anthony Pettis. I mean, that would be a fun fight against Anthony Pettis, and he's a big name, obviously being a former champion in the promotion, and it's a fun fight. So I think it would be. I think Anthony Pettis would actually be a great introduction for Michael Chandler into the UFC. Also, I just quickly want to say as well. I know this is not part of the question, but I saw a lot of people, in media, and I'm not trying to talk shit or anything like that. I'm not trying to, certainly everyone's entitled to their opinions, and certainly there are a lot of informed opinions out there. But I would say I would disagree with the notion that a lot of people think that this is kind of, and I think Kevin Lee actually said this, and a few other people have voiced the same opinion, but. One, it's kind of a dig at Bellator. Like, look, you're the face of your promotion, or one of your faces of your promotion, a former champion of your organization. We bring him over, and he's not fighting for a title. He's a replacement opponent, and almost putting like a replacement opponent to have almost like a negative connotation. So a lot of people have seen it as a dig at Bellator. Some others have seen it like it doesn't make any sense. Like he should have like a better introduction, but. I would disagree with all that. I actually think this is great for Chandler, and I think this is a really good scenario. If either fighter pulls out, whether it's Justin Gaethje or Khabib, and remember, a title fight is happening because Justin Gaethje is a champion. He's an interim lightweight champion, so he would have the right to defend his belt if Khabib were to pull out. it would be a title fight either way, right? And if Gaethje pulls out, you got the actual champion. So one, you'd be fighting for the belt. That's huge, right? Your first fight in the UFC, you'd be fighting for a title. That's pretty damn big. The UFC has done a few title fights on short notice, right? A lot of fights on short notice that have turned out to be really big. I mean, let's not forget Nate Diaz didn't need a build up to fight Conor McGregor and turn into a huge star. I mean, there's so many other title fights that have been assembled in a short amount of time, and both fighters have come out winning, not only money wise but promotion wise. So I think it makes sense for Michael Chandler, and even if he doesn't end up fighting, right, if his services as a replacement opponent are not needed, it's certainly still a good situation for him. I mean, I'm talking about him right now in the title picture, right? He's going to go through fight week doing interviews, media day doing interviews about being a potential opponent. His name's already being pit, and he's being tagged along, the likes of Justin Gaethje, the likes of Khabib Nurmagomedov, right? I'm sure Khabib and Justin Gaethje are going to get questions about Michael Chandler, right? So you're immediately inserting him into the conversation. So even if he doesn't end up fighting for the belt, even if he doesn't end up being a replacement opponent, it's still like a media tour. He's still going to Abu Dhabi. He's still doing the rounds of media, right? Let's not forget, to the hardcores, he might be a very big name, but I have questions about the casuals. I'm sure across the casuals, he does have some sort of crossover. I mean, he had some beautiful wars with Eddie Alvarez, right? He's certainly, again, like I said, a face of Bellator. But I don't think it hurts to do media under the UFC, right? I don't think it hurts for his name to be paired with the likes of Gaethje, of the likes of Khabib Nurmagomedov. So I think this is a win-win for him. Either he fights for the belt or he does a nice media tour, goes to Abu Dhabi, and immediately, this almost just inserts him into the conversation of being a top 5 lightweight in the world and in that division. So I disagree completely with the fact that, this is a sort of bad move from the UFC to put Michael Chandler as a replacement opponent for UFC 254. All right, next question is by the Seaside. Shouts out to the Seaside. I love that account. Always great questions. Who will fight Edwards, Leon Edwards? And will it be this year? So that's a very interesting question. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about Leon Edwards, who the last time he's fought, and I think people are forgetting about this. The last time he fought was July. Not July of this year, July of 2019. So it's been a long time since Leon Edwards has stepped in the cage. He's currently on an 8-fight win streak. I believe he's ranked, number 3 in the UFC's official rankings? Let me double check on that. Certainly the top 5. Yeah, so he's currently sitting at number 3. So great position. Hasn't fought in well over a year. None of the top guys want to fight him. Very, very tough spot that he's in, right? But yeah, recently, and I mean recently as in today, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson took to Twitter to call him out. And I think, according to him, I don't know if this is true, I think he might have forgotten a few other call-outs, but this is the first call-out that he does. Didn't he call out Jorge Masvidal once? Like BMF versus the nicest motherfucker or some shit like that. I don't know. But anyways, according to him, this is the first call out that he does, and he's calling out Leon Edwards. And I think that fight makes perfect sense. Leon obviously fighting a little bit down the rankings because he's sitting above Wonderboy Thompson, but it's not like he's going all the way down to 15 to get a name. No, he's, Wonderboy's ranked in the top 5. He's a former title challenger, 2-time, right? And clearly, he's been headlining pay-per-views. He's been in many pay-per-views, been in many exciting fights as well. So one of the bigger names in the division. So I would actually say that out of all the people, let me pull up Leon Edwards' record here. Out of all the people that Leon has fought, I mean, I would say that Wonderboy would be the biggest opponent, right? I mean, is Wonderboy bigger than RDA? I mean, RDA was an actual champion, right? But a lot of people have defeated him at 170. I would argue that Wonderboy is probably a bigger name than RDA. It's certainly higher ranked right now, so that's something. Wonderboy easily a bigger name than Gunnar Nelson. Maybe not Donald Cerrone, but certainly I would say that a win over Wonderboy would mean more than beating Donald Cerrone. So anyways, this is a good fight for Leon. Again, it's not Jorge Masvidal. It's not Colby Covington, but it's still Wonderboy Thompson. That's a pretty damn good fight. So if I were him, I would just stop calling out Colby and Masvidal, because I think Chael said this speaking with Ariel, if I'm not mistaken. He's like, one of the worst things you could do or happen to you is call a bunch of people out and then not get those fights because you look powerless. And that's kind of true. Not only that you look powerless, but also your call-outs just mean less, right? If you get a guy that just calls out fights or calls out fighters like every now and then, like it just feels, oh shit. Like I remember when Conor McGregor was in his early stages and he would call people out, like it felt like a big deal. And then after a while, especially when he was inactive, he was calling people out like every single fight card. And then after a while, everybody was just like, whatever. So anyways, I think he should like chill on that and just F it. Take the Wonderboy Thompson fight. It's a great fight for him. It's a big name and certainly a win there, depending what other things happen in the division. It could get him a title shot. It could, right? Obviously, Masvidal and Colby are still ahead of him, but depending if they lose fights or they get injured, etc. I mean, Leon would have a solid case to step in there and fight for the belt. So again, he hasn't fought in well over a year. Just take the fight. I think that's a fight that makes sense for him. And will he fight this year? Shit. I'm optimistic. I'll say yes. I'll say he'll fight in December. I'll say he'll fight in December. Yeah. All right. Good question, Seaside. Out there looking out for Leon Edwards. All right. The next question is by The Executioner 91. Shouts out. We don't see a lot of work that goes on behind closed doors. I have always been curious, who is/are the hardest working journalists you know? So that's a tough question. I kind of like sometimes these like sort of industry questions. They're kind of fun. I mean, everyone that I've worked with, one of their characteristics has always been a hard worker. I mean, I don't think you can go by and be successful in this industry and actually like make a living doing this without being a hard worker. That goes just about any profession, really, but especially this one. Like, there's so much going on. I mean, think about this. We've been having events every weekend for like how long? I can't even remember. And this runs all the way till like the end of the year. So, and who knows if it's going to continue. There's always stuff happening in MMA. It's a crazy, crazy sport. And you always need, people covering it. And it's a sport that, again, it's constantly, it doesn't have off season, right? So it's just all year round. And you got to work hard, man. You got to work hard. You got to work basically like all weekends pretty much. You can say goodbye to your weekends. And yeah, a lot of events, like for example, International Fight Week revolves around like 4th of July. So like if you're trying to go party and barbecue, like maybe you can do it. But most likely you'll end up working. I don't know. Last year for New Year's, I was covering World Series of Fighting. And I spent New Year's at a press conference room at the theater at Madison Square Garden, which I'm not complaining. I'm just letting you know, like, you certainly are out there working a lot and working in times that maybe other people are taking off, right? So I would say everyone, but certainly like from my experience here at MMA Junkie, like everyone works extremely hard. Yeah, I mean, really, if you want to be in MMA journalism, like you got to work your ass off. You got to hustle. So I would say everyone. And a little tip to the people that are hoping to get into MMA journalism, like unless you want to do it part-time, I guess that's fine. But if you're trying to do this thing full-time and like make a living out of it, be ready to like work a shit ton. But again, it's work that I love doing. So, I mean, sometimes it can get like, it can like feel like work a little bit, but for the most part, like, I love doing what I'm doing. So, it's not tough for me to like get up in the morning and work. All right. Michael Terrell. Michael Terrell asks, Woodley versus Cowboy. Sounds like a good option for both fighters, in my opinion. Who do you think would be the favorite? So I do agree. For some reason, I can't picture those two fighting each other. Maybe it's because Woodley's just like such a massive welterweight, and then Cerrone is mostly a lightweight, I guess, somewhere in between. But, if you really do look at it, it kind of does make sense. Like, you're onto something here, Michael Terrell, because it kind of does make sense because, both guys are kind of clearly past it, right? I would say Cerrone has a little bit more life in him as far as fighting. But at the same time, Tyron Woodley has reached greater heights, right? Obviously being a champion in the promotion. Cerrone hasn't. So that kind of evens out, I guess. I would still pick Cowboy just because he actually strikes and he's actually active. The only issue there is, like, for example, one of the biggest things that has been an issue to Tyron Woodley has been wrestlers, right? Like guys that are good at wrestling, good in the clinch, guys that are strong and have been able to not only back him up against the cage, but like pin him down and clinch him, right? We saw that this weekend with Colby Covington. We saw that with Gilbert Burns, and we clearly, obviously, saw that with Kamaru Usman. Now, would Donald Cerrone be able to do that? I don't think so. And even if you were to be able to like clinch up with Tyron Woodley, and even if you were better, like Woodley's just so much bigger. I think he would just like outmuscle his way out of positions, out of the clinch. Certainly his back against the cage and sort of staying in that range of the octagon. I don't think that would change. That's like very much his style, or at least recently. And that's where maybe like I don't think that's a good style to have in any fight, even against Cerrone. But again, like some of the tools that would present them a lot of issues, Cowboy Cerrone doesn't possess that. Maybe the volume a little bit because Cowboy does like to strike, but not the wrestling, not the clinching. So yeah, it could make sense. It could make sense. But before I'd match those two up, I think I could find way more interesting bouts for those two without them fighting each other. But anyways, if they would fight, I'd match up. I would favor, Cowboy, I think. Yep. Did anybody ask me about Woodley? I don't know if somebody did in the chat, because that'd be I have some thoughts on that. That'd be an interesting conversation to have. Yeah, somebody did. All right, yeah. So I'll address that in the YouTube portion a little later. Let's see here. A passive wokeness. Now, this is the first question that I talked about at the beginning of this video. So, anyways, A passive wokeness says, when was the last time a new fighter got an immediate title shot? Dan Henderson. Chandler may fall in that exact position. Thoughts on the entire situation? I don't have my glasses on, so I kind of see a little blurry. Trying to think of fighters that got immediate title shots when they signed with the promotion. Dan Henderson, certainly, when he fought Anderson Silva, right? He had the Pride belt, and that was a big deal. I remember watching that fight. I'm trying to think of others. I feel like there's certainly been others, right? Certainly, like early UFC, I feel like. I don't know. No one else comes to mind besides Dan Henderson, but I think there has to be like some others for sure. I think so. Maybe Big Nog, maybe Big Nog, right? Let me see. Let me check that out. I think he might have been. Let me see. When did he join the UFC? So he joined the UFC in. No, not even. Nope. Yeah, I don't know. Certainly a good question, but I think there's got to be others. Even like Strikeforce crossovers, right? Like maybe WEC. What about WEC merger? I don't know, but good question. I would have to actually like do some research, but like right off the bat, I have no idea. All right, the Executioner 91 back at it again. Now this is the final question. There's also a two-part question. Final question on the Twitter portion. So again, quick reminder, if you want to throw questions on the YouTube live chat, you may do so now, and I will get to that in a second. All right, so some good suggestions. Hold on, let me hold this question right here. Dave Bennett, certainly. Yup, Dave Bennett. And Joe Soto. Joe Soto was a champion. He fought TJ Dillashaw on short notice because Renan Barao, I think that's when he like slipped in the sauna and like knocked himself out or something like that. And Joe Soto was a champion. Was it King of the Cage? What the hell happened to Joe Soto too? That was a good fight too. He put on a nice performance. Let me see here. So when he fought TJ Dillashaw, he was a champion at Tachi Palace. Nice, yeah. Not the biggest promotion, but certainly for the lighter weight classes, it's a good promotion, yeah, I'd say. Anyways, good looks. The DXJ C56. All right, back to the last Twitter question. The Executioner 91 says, fucking Chimaev has a run-in with Holland and calls him the help. He quotes, okay, fine. Maybe it's just bad English and cultural differences. But after the fight, he goes on to say Holland should clean his room. What the fuck? Part 2. Why do you think MMA journalists during the pressers ever directly tell fighters some of the shit that they say is unacceptable? Part 2. Is the MMA community too lenient with holding fighters accountable for their actions? Jones, Khabib, Conor, etc. So I certainly understand your sentiments, but I kind of disagree where you're coming from. Like, keep in mind, like, journalists, like, our whole function is not to... I think in some cases, I mean, it's a tough question. For mostly with like journalism, like, you gotta call things how you see them, right? Like, I've done like a fairly like a decent amount of reporting on Colby, like whether it's writing up his tweets or whatever, and certainly like stuff that he says against the Black Lives Matter. I think all that's important, obviously. So like you have to report on it, right? But I can say, like, he says like racial insensitive things, but for me to be like, to say like, oh, he shouldn't be saying this, he shouldn't, that's what the public should conclude, right, from looking at this or reading or whatever. So like, it's not really our job to go up there and be like, hey man, you shouldn't be saying that, like this and that, and explain to them why they shouldn't be saying that. The promotion is actually more in a position to do that, right? Especially since they're representing the promotion. So they would want to, right, maybe if they want to, like, I guess, sort of clean up their image or put a certain look out there, say something about their culture, right? That they're more inclusive, etc. That they stand behind black athletes, this and that. But yeah, our job is not really to like directly tell fighters like, yo, like this is unacceptable. Like, you can write opinion columns, right? And stuff like that, and certainly voice your opinion on that. I can go on this program and be like, yo, that shit ain't cool, because it's not. I wouldn't say anything like that. But that's me talking to you guys, right? It's very different, like talking to the fighter. I can ask the fighter, like, why'd you think that, right? And I can question him about that and things of that nature, right? And then, think of journalism sort of like we're just like, journalists are just really building a window for you to be able to see all the facts, see all the information, right? And that window is supposed to be clear, right? Free of any biases, right? And any opinion, right? Obviously, it's extremely difficult, almost impossible to be completely unbiased, just because you're born places, right? You're from somewhere, right? I may have a certain affinity to Hispanic fighters. Why? Because I was born in Colombia and I'm Hispanic. Again, there's many different factors that may sort of maybe not stay in the window, but certainly give it like certain different variations. That's why it's so important to like look for information in many different sources, right? Because it gives you sort of a different angle of the same sort of viewpoint, right? Of the same topic. But yes, to answer your question number one, like it's not our job to go out there and be like, certainly when I think certain things are said and certain For example, even like the comments for like Israel Adesanya and the Twin Towers, like that shit ain't cool. But what was her job? Just to report, look, this is what he said. And then that's when the public slammed him and he had to take back his comments, right? And certainly, like I said, you can write an opinion on that. You can go on a talk show, and discuss that. But to go on the microphone and be like, yo, Israel, like, you can't say that, man. That ain't cool. Like, that's not really our job. And number 2, is the MMA community too lenient with holding fighters accountable for their actions? I guess it depends what you're referring to the MMA community, like the promotion, right? Certainly the promotion, it's kind of lenient. We've seen the promotion take disciplinary actions on John Jones, on Conor McGregor, and others as well in the past. I mean, they've even released fighters, certainly not really famous ones, because it's probably bad for business. But they've released fighters that have had ugly ties, right? Or they've put out certain statements out there. So they've done, I guess, some of their part. Maybe there's a case that the UFC could do a lot better, but then you'd get into a difficult conversation about are they employees or independent contractors. And also, you got to keep in mind, this is the fight game. Like, the end goal is a fist fight, you know? So when that's on the line, like, and you're talking about this kinds of sports, like, there's certainly a lot more room for things to get uglier. I certainly don't prefer it. Like, I don't like what happened between McGregor and Khabib, right? I don't like a lot of the things that are being said of Colby Covington, of black athletes. I don't like it at all. But I certainly think there's also a conversation about, like, how much censorship there should be. I certainly think there should be some, right? There's certainly things that, like, you just can't get away with. But at the same time, there needs to be, I guess, a little bit of room, because it is the fight game. I don't know. It's a very complex question. Yeah. So I guess those would be all the factors that kind of address the second part of your question there about the MMA community, right? The MMA community is composed of fans, composed of media, composed of promotions. Certainly the fans, some, I feel like they're very aware of what's going on. Some fans have a very sober opinion on many matters, and I feel like, you know, they know what's what, and they don't look over things. But I feel like most fans do. Like, I remember even like even people that are like working media and like are famous, right? And like you'd think that like they should know better, but like I remember when like Tony Robbins was like interviewing Conor McGregor, and they were having a chat, and then they were talking about the brawl with Khabib, and then he was talking about how he, like, you know, Conor was talking about how, like, he like sucker punched like Khabib's cousin or something, I don't know. And then like everybody was laughing, and then he's like, next time I'm gonna knock him out or something like that, and everyone was like praising him, and even like Robbins was like pretty stoked about it. And it's just like, dude, like, that's assault. But I guess because it's the fight game, and like people just, I feel like they're so detached because they're so different from fighters, that they kind of just see it like as in not a big deal. But like, you know, I mean, if I were go punch anybody of those people that were laughing, you know, sucker punch them in the back of the head in a fight, in a scenario where neither of us are getting paid to fight, in a scenario where neither of us agreed on the fight, like literally just a straight up sucker punch, you'd call the cops. So it's very hypocritical. And again, it's the fight game, and I certainly feel like because it is the fight game, and people just don't, like, you don't grow up like fighting, right? Like training fighting, like that's just such a far thing from like other sports, right? Like people play recreational basketball, soccer, etc. That like I feel like there's definitely a disconnection, and fighters, or not fighters, but like fans just let certain things fly by because whatever, you know, it's fighting. But yeah. Anyways, it's a very complex question. I mean, I can spend hours on this, but certainly a very good one. All right. Well, this is the part of the program where we switch gears here into the YouTube live chat. So again, thank you. Shouts out to everyone who submitted questions via Twitter. Very much appreciated to get questions beforehand, so at least I can have some stuff on my head, right, about the topic, you know. Again, these are submitted in the same day, so it's not like I spend days or weeks researching these kinds of things, but certainly, I have an idea of what I'll be talking about. But anyways, I still enjoy the YouTube ones. I think it's a fun component to this program because they're kind of on the fly. So you'll get a better, more natural, I guess, more candid, I don't know, reaction of me. Alex Howie. Alex Howie's out here asking, any news on Kron Gracie? He hasn't fought in almost a year. So, yeah, last time he fought was against Cub Swanson. Mr. Cub Swanson. And then we haven't seen him since. What has he been doing? I don't know. But you know what's a good place to find out? Instagram. I don't think he has Twitter. I don't. Let me see here. Kron Gracie. You got to keep in mind, like, you say, like, oh, it hasn't been, you know, it's been a year since he hasn't fought. But, like, we've been in this pandemic since March, right? We're in September now, so it's been 7 months. So, really, he hasn't fought in 6 months because the pandemic doesn't really count because there wasn't events for a while and then everything's, like, so backlogged, right? And it's just a lot harder to fight right now. That's why, you know, you don't see the full roster that being active, right? So yeah, I would give him some slack on that. He really hasn't been that inactive. And let me pull up his record here. But yeah, I don't know what the deal is. I've texted Kron numerous times. That he doesn't really reply. Like he does, and that's still like not just to me specifically, but to many. I remember a coworker at the previous place that I was working at saw him at an event. He's like, "Oh yeah, you know your coworker was texting me. I'm gonna get back to him." Never did. Yeah, he's just a guy that's very low key. Doesn't like social media. Doesn't like being sort of in the news and doing media and all that. Like he's just not into that. He's very much a martial artist in that sense. He likes to fight and he's gonna sign a contract and show up. And when he's not fighting, he's gonna do his own thing and kind of lay low. So I don't know what his deal is, but I'll certainly, if I can find out, I'll certainly will. But I'd like to see him back. I'd like to see Kron Gracie versus Ryan Hall at some point. I mean, same weight class, amazing jiu-jitsu, right? I mean, you would just love to see it just in straight up grappling. You know, forget about MMA. You know, that'd be an amazing fight. So hopefully that fight goes down at some point. All right, I knew this was coming, right? You can't have one of these around coming off UFC Vegas 11 and not talk about Mr. Khamzat. So what's next for Chimaev? Welter or middleweight? So good question, Muhammad, because I thought you were going to ask me about opponent. And on Spinning Backlick, on MMA Junkie Spinning Backlick, which published today, I actually discussed this. I'm like, you know, we're discussing like who should be next for him. And certainly Gorgeous George and the Ghost had fantastic answers. I mean, those guys are super knowledgeable on the sport. I love them. They're amazing. They're great. By the way, I'll break a little news here. Fuck it. I mean, it's not huge, but for the next episode of my Spanish language podcast, Hablemos MMA, George and Ghost will be on the show, and they'll be helping me break down what we see from UFC 253. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And then we're going to have a guest on top of that. So yeah, it's going to be a stacked show. I wanted to make it a little bit special because obviously it's the 10th episode. So, you know, it's not the biggest milestone. It's not 100 or anything like that, but it's something. I'm proud of that podcast, and I'm very passionate about that project. You know, it's a project that I've had in mind for a bit. And George and Ghost are two guys that I admire a lot. They're Peruvian. They're two Latinos that have been grinding for years and have been in the sport for so long, pioneers in that sense. So kind of look up to them, and obviously they've been very successful. So they're awesome. And as people, they're fucking awesome. They're great. But anyways, yeah. So they gave pretty good answers, and my answer was kind of like, before we even start talking about opponents, like, let's just pick a weight class. Like, this was fun. Khamzat, this was great. 170, 185, just a few weeks' notice. Taking on whoever, whenever. It's been great. It's been a fun ride. You've made your splash in the MMA world. Certainly, the hardcores know who you are. Certainly, you're starting to catch some traction. I mean, you just had Israel Adesanya address Khamzat in an interview with Kevin Iole. People are talking about him. You did it. Now it's the time to pick a weight class because you can't be contender at both. You know how hard it is to get a title shot at 170? You know how difficult it is to get a title shot at 185? It's extremely hard. So if you're splitting your time and fighting in two weight classes, it's just going to be a lot harder. Plus, you're either going to be a small middleweight, right? Eventually, you'll start meeting guys that are just as skilled as you, and then size will make the difference. Or you'll just get too used to fighting a weight class above that cutting down to 185 could be problematic, right? And he's still young. He's like, what, 26? So I think right now is the time to pick a weight class. Personally, he certainly has the height of a middleweight, but Gerald even said it himself. He's quite skinny. But again, Gerald got knocked out, so it's not like he doesn't have power in that division. He clearly does. So I think Khamzat is lucky enough and good enough, and with the perfect body type where he could be successful at both. Now it's the time to pick one. Certainly the line at 185 just seems to be a lot shorter. But given the fact that, again, Dana White likes him, the UFC likes him, he's building up a name, he can definitely shorten that line because skills-wise, you just fight, eventually you'll be in a good position, right? But like Leon Edwards, what he needs is a big name. Khamzat could develop that and sort of use that as leverage to get a get a title fight there. And look, it'd be in the UFC's favor to have two champions, one at 155 and one at 170 from that region, right? It certainly doesn't hurt. So I'd say right now he needs to pick a weight class. Personally, I think 170 is like so stacked right now that like we don't need another player. Like, sure, it'd be nice. I mean, I wouldn't complain if Khamzat becomes a top 5 and he's in that mix. Like, sure. But you got a lot of players in that weight class, right? You got a lot of veterans. You got a lot of people with big names. 170 is good. It doesn't need it. Now, I'm not saying 185 is in need of stars because certainly there are many, and there are many skilled fighters. But I would say it's a little less stacked than welterweight. So it certainly could use someone with a big name, someone that's causing some noise and a big splash, and that's Khamzat. So, bro, beef up. You got the height, get bigger and stick to 185. That's what I'd like to see from him. James Fallon Cote. Who in the top 10 can Woodley, he spelled that wrong, beat right now? So that is a great question. On Monday, on my Spanish language podcast, Hablemos MMA, I actually said no one in the top 15. But I didn't really carefully look at everything. But I did obviously like glance it over. It's not like I'm just talking shit. But like he said on Twitter, man, that night, with what we've seen from Woodley, that style just doesn't win fights. Backing up doesn't win fights, right? It can sometimes. But if you're going to back up, counter, throw combinations. But the combination of backing up and the low output, not putting together combinations, just throwing single shots every now and then, dude, and just defending, you're not going to win a fight. You're just not. Maybe there's certain guys that you can. Maybe there's certain guys that because of the lack of wrestling, like we mentioned with Donald Cerrone, maybe you won't need to back up that much. But I'm not. I think Woodley's days as an elite welterweight are over. I think it's pretty safe to say that. I mean, he's 38 years old. It's just really hard to imagine a world where he's able to turn that around, right? Again, stranger things have happened. I could be totally wrong. We could see Woodley come out in his next bout and look phenomenal, right? But I just doubt it. At this point, it's either retire, and if you're not going to retire, then have some fun fights. And if you're going to have fun fights, at least I'd like to see you get matched up against guys that against fighters that have different fight styles, right? Because Colby, Burns, and Usman, yes, they're different, but they kind of can implement that same strategy, right? They have the skill set to implement the same strategy that we are seeing that seems to be very effective against Woodley, right? You wouldn't be able to say that about a Wonderboy Thompson, right? He can't do the same thing. You wouldn't be able to say that about, I don't know, there's many others, right? So I'd like to see him against somebody that doesn't have that sort of fight style to see what really is left in Woodley. Maybe we're being too critical. Maybe Woodley actually does have a little bit left. It's just he's getting pretty bad matchups, and styles make fights, so you never know. My hunch is that he's mostly done, but I would say that it's fair to see him first against somebody else. So who should he fight? I think, Michael Chiesa would be fun. I wouldn't like his chances against Neil Magny. Nate Diaz would be fun. I mean, that fight was offered to him at some point. Why not? Nick Diaz would be fun if he were to return. We know there was Tyron Woodley wanted that fight ages ago. That could be fun. Robbie Lawler, another matchup. That could be fun. Again, either of those guys, again, Woodley still has a big name. It could serve as a co-main event or something like that, or beef up a main card somewhere. And yeah, we'll see what's left of Tyron Woodley. All right, we are 4 minutes away from the hour mark, so I'm gonna answer a couple questions and then bounce out. Dude, I don't know why I have cotton mouth. I have like the driest mouth right now. Let's see. This is pretty simple. Why don't you think UFC hasn't signed Patricio Pitbull yet? Well, CP, because he's under contract with Bellator. He hasn't tested free agency. He's always signed a new deal. So that tells me he has no interest in going to the UFC, no interest of testing free agency at the moment. Maybe that can change in a few years, but as of now, I don't think he has interest in going to the UFC, and I think he's fine where he's at. I mean, you see guys like Douglas Lima and other guys that are developing a legacy without the need of fighting in the UFC. Like, clearly, Lima is respected and regarded among one of the best welterweights on the planet, right? And he's done that through Bellator. And if you can do that, make a good living, and get treated well, and get treated as a star, right? Because if he were to cross over to the UFC, there's a lot more players there to deal with, right? So certainly, I don't think he'd get the same treatment. So I think that's pretty much the case with Patricio here. Like, he's comfortable, he's killing it, he's doing well, he's building a legacy. Clearly, a very good fighter at 145 and 155, certainly among the best. And he's doing it all while being a star, in a promotion and probably getting paid well. So, yeah, he's still under contract. That's why the UFC hasn't signed him. And apparently Dana White doesn't know who he is, which I doubt it. Let's see here. James Fallon Cote says, will Wonderboy Thompson fight for the title again? Do you see him winning against Usman or Colby versus Wonderboy for a title eliminator? If you would have asked me this a while ago, maybe like a year or two ago, I would have said no. Certainly a year ago, I would have said no. But his last outing against Vicente Luque, I was there. That was in November at UFC 244 in Madison Square Garden. Dude, he looked phenomenal. He looked fucking great. And I think the world of Vicente Luque. I think he's a phenomenal fighter. Someone who will eventually challenge for the belt, in my opinion. So right now, I'm kind of like, you certainly made some adjustments. Your skill set doesn't really revolve around being athletic, so you can get away with being kind of old. You certainly haven't taken a shit ton of damage. I mean, yeah, you've been knocked out. The Pettis knockout wasn't nice, but, it's not a guy that's been, Robbie Lawler type, like in a million wards, right? And yeah, it looks like he's changing shit in his game, so it's promising. Like, I certainly wouldn't count out a guy that's changing and that's still skilled. I would say it's unlikely, given the fact that there are big names there and the line seems to be kind of long. But I wouldn't rule it out. Why not? Say he does fight Leon Edwards, right? Because finally the UFC has someone that has a name that wants to fight Leon. So I don't see why they wouldn't make that fight. So let's say they do make that fight and he beats Leon Edwards. He becomes the guy that ends that 8-fight winning string. He becomes the guy that beat the guy that nobody wanted to fight. Shit, you're up there. You might be a fight away from fighting for the belt. So I wouldn't rule that out, right? All right. Couple more here, and then I'm bouncing. Let's see. Damn, those are some good questions. Mm, what are a couple of interviews that truly stand out for you that you have done during your time covering MMA? That's a good one. Um, interviews that stand out. There's a lot. There's a lot, man. I mean, it kind of depends because like it depends what you mean by stand out. Like certainly I've done some interviews that have become news and part of the news cycle, which obviously that's always nice. And you see it get mentioned in programs. You see a lot of other outlets picking up whatever was said in your interview. So that's nice. I've done a lot of that. Most recently with my Javier Mendez interview, that got picked up everywhere because, he basically doubled down and said, you know, Khabib wants to fight GSP, and that fight would determine the greatest of all time. Plus, he had a few other comments as well about Daniel Cormier and other things. So I saw a lot of people pick that up. And even my Valerie Loretta, I think that was the first time where she talked about, you know, social media and all that, and sort of answer critics in a more open way. Both those interviews, by the way, on Hablemos MMA. And I've done many other interviews that have sort of been picked up by the general MMA media. So that's nice. But I guess I would answer that question outside of that because that could happen with any interview, really. I like more of the interviews that I've done where I've told stories that haven't been told before, stories that are good stories, and I've done like several of those. Like, for example, one that I really like was one that I did with Michel Batista. At the time, Michel Batista wasn't known. He ended up fighting on The Ultimate Fighter, and I had a nice story about him when he wrestled and in the Olympics, and he wanted to fight with Daniel Cormier. And then at the time, it was interesting because he had no professional fights. At the time I interviewed him, he's an Olympic medalist. He represented Cuba, wrestled with Joel Romero, right, and so many other Cuban wrestlers that have transitioned into MMA. And I was one of the first people to interview him, and it was crazy. His story was so crazy because he defected. He came to the U.S. and like he didn't really know about MMA. Literally, you're one of the greatest. I wouldn't say one of the greatest wrestlers, but an elite world class wrestler that's won many medals in international competitions. You know what he was doing? Working at a warehouse moving pallets. That's what we talked about. And then Joel Romero found him on Facebook, and he's like, "Dude, you need to start fighting. Like, you can make money doing this. You're obviously a super good wrestler. Like, let's get you signed to a management." He signed, and that's when I kind of interviewed him, and I told that first story, which was really nice. Probably didn't get the most reads because again, it's not like Conor McGregor calls so and so a bitch, but to me that was important because to him it was important as well, and it was a nice story. So I really like that one. That's with Michel Batista. Certainly, when I wrote a story about the headline was Marlon Vera fighting for a smile. This is when he was fresh out of the Ultimate Fighter Latin America. Nobody knew Chito Vera back then, and Chito Vera wasn't nowhere close to as good as he is now. And I told the story about his daughter and the condition that she had, and that he was basically fighting to raise money so he could pay for her operation. And he did. He eventually, fought enough and saved enough money that she was able to get the surgery. So I was the first to tell that story. And most of those stories really have come through the fact that I know Spanish. So I'm able to like speak to a lot of fighters that maybe don't speak English or speak very little or can't express themselves fully in English. So, speaking Spanish, I'm able to tell better stories. So I really enjoy those. I'm trying to think of others. Humberto Vandené, when he made his UFC debut and got like a 14-second knockout over Martin Brau. Vandené is no longer in the UFC, but at the time it was a big deal, and his circumstances were crazy. He was his father had died like a week, like a couple weeks prior to that, and he couldn't attend to the funeral because he had to fight, and it was just like a very emotional moment for him. And even in the interview, the guy was certainly still grieving. And there's a lot of interviews that I hold fondly and that I'm proud of and that stand out. I'm more like I like more of those type of interviews. The news cycle, like, yeah, that's all fun and certainly nice that it gets picked up elsewhere, but I don't know. Fuck it, I'm gonna go long just because like last week I fucked up and I didn't have a live Q&A, so I'll make it up to you guys this week. The same person. Let's see. How was it to interview Amanda Rivas? She seems like a very interesting character to chat with. Yeah, she's lovely. She's awesome. I interviewed her when she was gonna fight. Who's she gonna fight? This was in Tampa. I'm forgetting now. Was it Mackenzie Dern? Yeah, yeah, maybe. Was it? I've interviewed her when she was gonna fight in Tampa, that same card where Michelle Watterson fought Yona Jędrzejczyk. And yeah, Amanda Rivas. As soon as I interviewed her, at the time I was working for another outlet, and my colleague now, Mike Bong, was there representing MMA Junkie. And as soon as that interview was done, we were like, dude, like, yeah, Mackenzie Dern. We're like, dude, this girl can become something. Like, she's got like a crazy, like a fun, crazy personality. Like, she's funny. Yeah, I don't know. She's just like like people are very attracted to her personality. Plus, she's very good looking. So, and not only that, but she's a fucking badass fighter. So that was one of the moments that you go like, ooh, this is someone to keep an eye on for sure. Yeah, she's cool. Hi, Danny. Miss you and Luke together. Any chance of seeing you on Morning Combat? Tell him to invite me. Squall 91. Who wins? Costa or Adesanya? Fuck. That's a tough one. I'm going with Adesanya. But like, certainly there's been. Adesanya has improved a lot. But if you look at the Kelvin Gastelum fight, Kelvin was able to connect a lot, right? And I just think if Paulo Costa is able to connect just like 60% of that, or like 70% of that, not full on, he's got. I mean, I don't see anybody withstanding those type of punches, and still be standing. So Costa definitely has a good chance in this fight. Also, I've heard from people, like, on Monday's episode of Hablemos MMA, I interviewed Juan Espino, right? Juan Espino knows Eric Albarracin. They've worked together and they have a good relationship. So he's going with Costa. Obviously, he's a bit biased. It's all good. Like, that's a friend, right? Not necessarily a teammate, but a friend of his in the industry. So, don't fault him for going with him. But he did say something interesting. He's like, I don't think we're going to see the fight that people expect. I think Albarracin and that camp have developed something different and have something in store for Israel Adesanya. And I've heard from a few other people that they might go in there and wrestle. I just can't see it just because Costa is a striker and, he doesn't have the body type to wrestle. Plus, Adesanya has a pretty good takedown defense. But if he's able to throw off Adesanya slightly, say with wrestling or whatever new tools they add to the game, dude, his striking's already dangerous. It would just become even more dangerous. So this is one of those fights where it's just hard to predict. But for me, at least from what I've seen, it seems to me that Adesanya is the more talented fighter. So I always go with that. So I'm going to go with Adesanya, but that's a tough pick, man. It's a tough pick. Zach Durkin, do you train any art? I've talked about this extensively on previous live Q&As. A lot of people have asked me. I wrestled in high school for 2 years, and surprisingly, when I started jiu-jitsu, my wrestling got better somehow. I would say I'm a decent wrestler. I started training jiu-jitsu in 2011. I got my blue belt in 2013. Then, I trained consistently, and somewhere along the line, as soon as I finished college and just started working and, basically became an adult and I was in the regular workforce and I moved to New York, my training went. Then I would train sporadically here and there. I tore my meniscus, got that fixed through like basically own rehab. Kept training here and there. Then got a hernia, so then had to get surgery on that. Then I started boxing. I've been boxing for like a year, but then the pandemic fucked me up. So like, I would say I'm a decent grappler. I'm like a really good blue belt or a shitty purple belt. I can definitely roll with people. I can roll with black belts and, I probably get my ass kicked, but there's certainly a conversation there. It's not like I'm there laying flat on my back, not knowing what to do. Like, I can grapple. I've grappled with a lot of brown belts and given them some tough fights. I hold my own in jiu-jitsu. I'm pretty decent. Ask New York Rick. I took him a few times to training at the academy that I was training at in Williamsburg. I'm not bad. I'm not bad in jiu-jitsu. And in boxing, I'm pretty bad. But I would say I'm a lot better than what I was. Obviously, like, I know my combinations. I know my basics. I think I got a decent jab, so I think. My footwork sucks. Head movements, I'd like to say it's kind of decent. I don't know. But, I've trained in boxing. I've sparred. Certainly not good, but compared to an average Joe, yeah, I think I like my chances. Oh, Alexandra Scafidi shuts up. Good Twitter follow. Thoughts on Covington being ranked above Burns when they both beat Woodley? Is that true? Not calling you a liar, Alex, but let me double check. Let me look at the rankings. What? Colby apparently is number one contender. Yeah. To answer your question, because the rankings don't mean shit, or they kind of mean something, but they're pretty shitty. I mean, you're talking about Colby. Let's not talk about Woodley because, he just beat him, right? They both beat Woodley. And Burns is on a nice win streak, right? He's like coming off a win over Woodley, also Damian Maia, and a few others. Like, yeah, it makes no sense. Burns should be number one contender. Number two should probably be Covington, or maybe Edwards. Edwards is still missing that signature win, in my opinion. But, yeah, the fucking rankings suck. But at least the good thing about this one is that even though the rankings suck and they're not being honored here and Covington is above Burns, at least Burns is getting the title shot, right? So it'd suck if they'd give the number one contender, right? Because it's the right thing to do, but it wouldn't be the legit number one contender. That would suck. But in this situation, the number one contender, which is rightfully Gilbert Burns, in my opinion, is fighting for the belt. So all in all, I think it's okay. But yeah, rankings are pretty much shit. All right, Safe City Light. Pretty cool setup. What? Pretty cool setup. Chat questions appearing. Is it hard but Dana White's behind him? What? This is probably a previous conversation that I was... Oh, probably about Khamzat. You're referring that to. Let's see here. Okay, this one's an interesting. Most likely to lose to Chimaev. Adesanya or Usman? I say Usman. Size. All right. Does Diego Sanchez fight this weekend? Apparently, yeah. UFC 253 against Jake Matthews. I like Diego. I think they should just put him in some fun fights. Fight Clay Guida, fight Donald Cerrone. Give him sort of a nice retirement tour. I'd like to see that more often. The UFC doesn't do retirement tours. It's always like, dude, you're going to fucking leave the sport on a bad losing streak. You're fighting the toughest till the day you stop fighting. But in my opinion, they should have a little bit more fun. Bellator does a good job on that. Fuck it. Let's see some fun fights, right? Fuck it. Diego Sanchez, Nick Diaz, the rematch. I'm about it. Why not? But, yeah. All right, well, that does it for the questions this week. I went a little over 15 minutes, but I said I'd make it up to you guys because last week we didn't have a live Q&A. Apologies for that. I was busy. It was my birthday week, so, give me a break. But next week I will return on Tuesday. I don't know exactly my schedule yet, so it's either 10:30 a.m. or 7:30 p.m. Obviously, depending on my schedule, I will have to pick, but you will definitely get an answer on Monday. I'll release something on Monday on my Twitter. I'll post something on my Twitter announcing whether it's at 10:30 a.m. or 7:30 p.m. Now, 7:30 p.m. is just my alternative, but on a standard, it is 10:30 a.m. Eastern. So always expect Tuesday, 10:30 a.m. This channel, Knowledge, the best live chat in the game. Always expect that. All right, sounds good. Again, thank you so much to everybody that submitted questions via Twitter. Always appreciate that. Make sure you do. The YouTube ones are fun. Don't get me wrong, but it's nice to get those questions ahead of time, so maybe I can provide an answer that's a little bit more elaborate, right? A couple of things to look out for. Spinning back click released today on MMAJunkie.com. Check that out. I was there with, like I said, the Goes and Gorgeous George. Good topics. Pretty good discussion. And yeah, next Monday we'll have Hablemos MMA, episode number 10. So we'll be doing that, something a little special there. So that's to my Spanish speakers. And other than that, follow me on Twitter. You got the handle right here. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I don't use that much, but if you want, at your own risk, certainly Instagram and Twitter, you can find me there, posting stuff all the time. And that's it. Like, subscribe, follow, tell your friends about this shit. And that's it. I'm out of here.